The morning sun streams through the stained glass windows of Living Grace Pentecostal Church, casting vibrant colors over the congregation. Pastor Robert Williams stands at the pulpit, delivering an inspiring sermon on family and forgiveness. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors swing open, slamming against the walls. Sheriff Jack Miller storms in, gripping a manila envelope in one hand and his service revolver in the other. "Robert!" Jack's voice echoes through the sanctuary, silencing the choir. His face is etched with fury and heartbreak. "You betrayed me! You fathered my kids, every single one of them!" Jack shouts, shaking the envelope. Gasps ripple through the congregation. Pastor Robert stumbles back, his confident demeanor cracking. "Jack, this isn't the place," he begins, but Jack cuts him off. "You are a fraud," Jack growls, his voice trembling with emotion. "You destroyed my family and preached to us like you were a man of God." 3 shots ring out, echoing off the church walls. Blood stains the altar as Robert collapses and chaos erupts. Congregants scream, some rushing to help Robert while others flee. Jack drops the gun, his face a mix of sorrow and grim determination. In that moment, as chaos engulfed the sanctuary, one question lingered in the air. How did it come to this? To the congregation of Living Grace Pentecostal Church, Pastor Robert Williams was the embodiment of faith and redemption. His sermons carried an authority that could bring tears to the eyes of his listeners, and his warm, approachable demeanor made him beloved by all. But beneath the polished exterior of a man devoted to God, Robert carried secrets that would unravel the very foundation of his carefully constructed life. Robert's journey to the pulpit wasn't the result of a seamless path. Raised in a strict, devout household in rural Texas, he had been expected to follow in the righteous footsteps of his father, a well-respected minister. But as a teenager, Robert rebelled. The quiet rebellion began with skipping Sunday school and lying about his whereabouts, but escalated into drinking, gambling, and associating with a crowd that drew him further from the faith. His actions devastated his family, particularly his father, whose disappointment weighed heavily on him. When Robert was 22, his life took a sharp turn. A devastating bar fight left him hospitalized for weeks, and during that time, his father visited him with a Bible in hand. "You've lost your way, son," he said, his voice filled with sorrow. "But it's never too late to come back to God." Something about the moment struck Robert deeply, not out of repentance but as a realization of how powerful faith could be as a force in people's lives. Robert's recovery became a story of redemption. He returned to church, studied theology, and eventually founded Living Grace Pentecostal Church. In just a few years, the congregation grew from a small gathering in a rented space to a sprawling campus with hundreds of members. Robert's charisma and powerful testimony of turning his life around drew people in. But what began as a ministry soon became something else, a stage for Robert's ambitions. While his public sermons were filled with humility and calls for service, privately, Robert had grown addicted to the adoration. The church wasn't just a place of worship, it was his empire. The donations, the praise, and the attention fed a need in Robert that no sermon or scripture could satisfy. Slowly, his decisions began to shift. Instead of focusing on the spiritual needs of his congregation, he prioritized growth, influence, and prestige. Robert justified his compromises by convincing himself it was for the greater good. A larger church meant reaching more souls. A thriving congregation meant a stronger community. But with every step forward, the cracks in his moral foundation deepened. It was during this time of ascent that Rachel Miller entered his life. The wife of Sheriff Jack Miller, Rachel was a picture of grace and devotion, actively involved in the church and admired for her kindness. But Rachel's life wasn't as perfect as it appeared. Jack's demanding job often left her feeling isolated, and the pressures of raising 4 children only added to her sense of loneliness. Rachel first approached Robert during a particularly trying time in her marriage, seeking pastoral counseling. Their sessions began innocently enough, with Rachel pouring her heart out about the struggles she faced as a wife and mother. Robert listened with empathy and offered words of encouragement, a role he had played for many others in the congregation. But something about Rachel was different. She wasn't just another member of the flock. She challenged Robert in subtle ways, pushing past his carefully constructed persona and exposing his vulnerabilities. For Rachel, Robert offered validation and comfort she hadn't felt in years. And for Robert, Rachel became more than a congregant. She was a reflection of the control and admiration he craved. Their relationship crossed the line one evening after a late counseling session. Alone in the church office, the tension between them boiled over. Both claimed it was a mistake, vowing never to let it happen again. But mistakes have a way of repeating themselves, and before long, what had been a one-time lapse became an ongoing affair. For Robert, Rachel represented a forbidden indulgence that fed the darker parts of his nature. He knew it was wrong, but he justified his actions by convincing himself that he was still serving the greater good. "What we have doesn't change the work we're doing," he told Rachel during one of their secret meetings. "We're helping people. That's what matters." The affair grew more complicated as time passed. Rachel became more deeply involved in church activities, often assisting Robert with events and programs. To the congregation, their partnership was a testament to teamwork and shared faith. Behind closed doors, it was a web of lies they both struggled to navigate. Rachel's guilt weighed heavily on her, but she couldn't bring herself to end the relationship. She was torn between her loyalty to Jack and her feelings for Robert, each day feeling like she was walking a tightrope. For Robert, the risks of exposure grew higher as his prominence in the community increased, yet he couldn't let go, even as his sermons on integrity and family values became tinged with a bitter irony. The ultimate complication came when Rachel discovered she was pregnant. The news hit Robert like a freight train. While Rachel panicked, Robert quickly calculated the risks and consequences. "Jack can't know," he said firmly, his voice betraying none of the turmoil he felt inside. "We'll raise the child as his. It's the only way to protect everyone." Rachel hesitated but ultimately agreed, convinced by Robert's reassurances. The decision set the stage for years of deception. As their family grew, so did the stakes. Rachel bore 4 children, each one carrying Robert's secret, and with each passing year, the weight of their lies became harder to bear. Robert's life was a careful balancing act, one that required constant vigilance to keep his two worlds from colliding. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and as his prominence grew, so did the cracks in the facade. The man who had built his life preaching faith, family, and redemption was living a lie that would one day bring everything crashing down. If you're a believer, show your faith. Type Jesus in the comments below. Sheriff Jack Miller was a pillar of his small Texas community, known for his fairness, dependability, and genuine care for those he served. As the town's sheriff for over a decade, Jack had earned the respect and trust of his neighbors. Beyond his badge, he was a devoted husband to Rachel and a loving father to their 4 children: Emma, 14, Noah, 12, Grace, 9, and Ben, 6. Jack's family life revolved around traditions that anchored them. Sundays were reserved for church at Living Grace Pentecostal Church, followed by family dinners and moments of connection. Jack found pride in tossing a football with Noah, helping Emma with school projects, and cheering for Grace at her piano recitals. Little Ben, the baby of the family, was his constant shadow. Jack saw his family as the foundation of his life, rooted firmly in their shared faith. Rachel, his high school sweetheart, was the glue of the family. She balanced raising 4 children with volunteering at the church and organizing events with Pastor Robert. Her grace and warmth complemented Jack's steady strength, and together, they were admired as the perfect couple. To the outside world, the Millers seemed to have it all: love, stability, and faith. Jack never doubted that his family was built on solid ground. His trust in Rachel was unwavering, and his admiration for Pastor Robert, who had guided their spiritual journey for years, was genuine. But cracks began to form in their seemingly perfect life. Rachel grew quieter and more distant, her smile fading under the weight of a secret Jack couldn't yet see. Small, seemingly insignificant changes hinted at a brewing storm, one that would test Jack's trust, faith, and love in ways he never thought possible. For years, Jack had no reason to doubt his wife, Rachel. She was a dedicated partner, a loving mother to their 4 children, and an active member of the church. But in recent months, Jack began to notice subtle changes in Rachel's behavior. At first, it was easy to dismiss her growing distance as stress or fatigue. After all, raising 4 children and managing a household was no small task. But as time went on, Rachel's actions became harder to ignore. She started taking late-night phone calls, her voice hushed as she stepped out of the room. She began making excuses for extra visits to the church, often claiming she needed to help with some urgent matter or assist Robert with a church project. Jack tried to brush it off, convincing himself that Rachel's increased involvement in church activities was nothing out of the ordinary. But a nagging feeling began to take root, a feeling he couldn't shake. One evening, Jack found himself awake long after Rachel had gone to bed. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, lighting up with a notification. It wasn't like Jack to invade his wife's privacy, but something compelled him to look. What he found sent a chill down his spine, a message from Robert. The text wasn't overtly incriminating, but it was intimate enough to make Jack's stomach churn. "I appreciate everything you've done for me, Rachel. I don't know what I'd do without you." Jack confronted Rachel the next morning, his voice calm but his eyes searching hers for answers. "What's going on between you and Robert?" Rachel's reaction was immediate, her face paled and she stumbled over her words. Finally, she admitted to an affair, but insisted it had ended years ago. "It was a mistake, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "I regretted it the moment it happened. It's over. It's been over for a long time." Her confession struck Jack like a blow. The woman he had trusted with his heart, the woman he had built his life with, had betrayed him. But what unsettled him even more was the feeling that she wasn't telling him the whole truth. Despite Rachel's assurances, Jack couldn't let it go. Her secrecy, the late-night calls, and now the revelation of an affair with Robert, it didn't add up. Doubt gnawed at him, and Jack began to replay moments from their marriage, searching for clues he might have missed. He couldn't ignore the growing unease in the back of his mind, especially when he looked at their 4 children. The thought came to him in a moment of desperation, and though he hated himself for it, Jack ordered DNA tests for all 4 of his kids. He told himself it was just to put his mind at ease, to prove that his fears were unfounded. When the results arrived, Jack opened the envelope with shaking hands. What he saw made his world come crashing down. None of the children were biologically his. The realization hit Jack like a freight train. The children he had loved, raised, and protected for years weren't his. Every moment, every memory, every milestone, it all felt like a lie. Jack sat in silence for hours, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. That evening, he confronted Rachel again, his voice raw with emotion. "The tests," he said, holding up the papers. "They're not mine. None of them. How could you do this to me?" Rachel broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Between gasps for air, she admitted the truth. All 4 children were Robert's. She confessed that the affair hadn't been a fleeting mistake, but a long-running relationship that had spanned years. "I didn't know how to stop," she cried. "I didn't want to hurt you, Jack. I was afraid of losing everything." Jack's anger boiled over, but beneath it was an even deeper pain. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair. It was about everything he thought he knew about his life. The family he had cherished was built on lies, and the man he had admired, trusted, and looked to for guidance had orchestrated it all. For the first time in his life, Jack Miller didn't know what to do. He felt humiliated, enraged, and utterly broken. The pillars of his life, his marriage, his family, his faith, had all crumbled in a single moment. Jack's world wasn't just crumbling, it was shattering, leaving him standing in the wreckage, unsure of how to move forward. But one thing became clear to him. This wasn't over. Jack Miller sat in his car outside Living Grace Pentecostal Church, the weight of the DNA results and the revolver in his lap pressing down on him like a physical burden. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he stared at the building that had once been a sanctuary of hope and faith for him. The man he had admired, trusted, and allowed into the deepest parts of his life had betrayed him in the most unimaginable way. Today, Jack wasn't here as a sheriff or a man of faith. He was here as a husband and father whose life had been shattered. As the clock struck 11 a.m., Jack pushed open the car door and stepped into the crisp morning air. With the envelope tucked under his arm and the revolver concealed at his side, he walked toward the church doors, his resolve unshaken. Inside, the congregation was mid-sermon, their voices raised in unison as Pastor Robert Williams led them in prayer. The heavy wooden doors of the church creaked open, drawing the congregation's attention. Jack's boots echoed ominously on the polished floor as he strode down the center aisle, his face a mask of fury and heartbreak. Conversations hushed, and even Robert paused mid-sentence, his confident expression faltering as he locked eyes with Jack. "Robert!" Jack's voice thundered, silencing the sanctuary. The murmurs of confusion gave way to a tense silence as all eyes turned toward the sheriff. Jack stopped a few feet from the pulpit, pulling the crumpled DNA results from his coat pocket. He held them up for the congregation to see. "You lied to me," he growled. "You lied to all of us." Robert's composure began to crack, but he attempted to remain calm. "Jack," he said, raising his hands in a placating gesture, "whatever you think is going on, let's talk about it privately. This isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," Jack snapped, his voice shaking with rage. He waved the envelope in the air. "You fathered my children. You betrayed me, my family, and this church." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Rachel, sitting in the front row, looked stricken. She clutched the edge of the pew, her face pale as she whispered, "Jack, please, not here." Robert's demeanor shifted as he realized the gravity of the situation. He shook his head, still trying to deny the accusations. "Jack, you're upset, and I understand that, but these claims are outrageous. Let's take this outside." But Jack wasn't finished. He opened the envelope and threw the papers onto the pulpit. "These are DNA results. Every single one of my kids, they're yours, Robert. Don't you dare stand here and lie to me again." The room erupted into chaos. Congregants murmured in disbelief, some rising from their seats while others sat frozen in shock. Robert's shoulders sagged as the truth became undeniable. "Jack," he began, his voice low, "I never meant for this to happen." Jack's body trembled, his voice thick with emotion. "You stood here," he said, gesturing to the pulpit, "preaching about family, about faith, while you destroyed mine. You're a fraud, Robert, a liar. How do you even stand before these people?" The tension in the room was suffocating as Jack's hand moved to his side, pulling out the revolver. Gasps filled the air as the gleam of the weapon caught the light. Congregants pleaded with Jack to stop. "Please, Jack, don't do this," someone cried out from the back. Others tried to shield their children from the escalating scene. Jack's hand shook as he raised the gun. "You lied to me," he said, his voice breaking. "You destroyed my family and acted like nothing happened." Robert, seeing the gun aimed at him, took a step back, his face pale. "Jack, please," he said, his hand still raised. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." But the apology, empty as it was, only fueled Jack's rage. His finger tightened on the trigger, and 3 deafening shots rang out. Robert staggered back, his white shirt blooming crimson as he collapsed onto the altar. A collective scream rose from the congregation. Some rushed forward to help, while others scrambled to the exits in panic. Rachel cried out, her voice cutting through the chaos. She knelt beside Robert, her sobs echoing through the now silent sanctuary as blood spread across the altar steps. Jack stood motionless, the gun still in his hand, his face a mix of anger and anguish. The reality of what he had done seemed to sink in as he looked down at Robert's lifeless form. One of the congregants shouted for someone to call 911. A few brave souls rushed to Robert's side, trying in vain to stem the bleeding. Jack let the revolver fall from his hand and raised his arms in surrender as one of his deputies cautiously approached. His voice, barely audible, broke through the commotion. "It had to end," he murmured. As Jack was led away in handcuffs, the once vibrant church was left in ruins, its congregation shaken and its leader bleeding on the altar where he had once stood as a man of God. The aftermath of the shooting left Living Grace Pentecostal Church in chaos. Robert Williams survived the attack but faced a long and grueling recovery. While his physical wounds began to heal, the damage to his reputation was irreparable. Public outrage followed as details of his affair with Rachel Miller and the paternity of her children became widely known. The man once heralded as a spiritual leader was now seen as a hypocrite. Broken and ashamed, Robert resigned from the church, addressing the congregation one last time in a tearful confession. "I have failed you," he admitted, "and I ask for your forgiveness." His words rang hollow to many, but for others, they marked the beginning of his attempt to atone for his sins. Jack Miller's arrest was swift. The sheriff, once respected as a pillar of justice, now found himself behind bars, charged with attempted murder. At his trial, Jack expressed deep regret for the violence, but stood firm in his belief that Robert's betrayal and deceit had justified his actions. "I lost everything because of his lies," Jack told the court, his voice heavy with emotion. The trial polarized the town, dividing the community into two camps: those who sympathized with Jack's anguish and others who condemned his decision to take the law into his own hands. Rachel Miller, caught in the center of the storm, faced her own reckoning. Ostracized by the community, she became the target of harsh judgment and whispers. Her children, devastated by the revelations, struggled to process the truth about their parentage. Rachel's attempts to rebuild her relationship with them were met with resistance, and she wrestled with the overwhelming guilt of her choices. What was once a seemingly perfect family had crumbled under the weight of betrayal and secrecy. The fallout left Living Grace Pentecostal Church on the brink of collapse. Attendance plummeted, and the congregation dwindled as members abandoned the place that had been a sanctuary for years. For those who stayed, the focus shifted from condemnation to healing. Under new leadership, the church underwent a transformation, rebranding itself as a place of transparency and restoration. Years of effort were required to rebuild trust within the community, but slowly, the church began to thrive again, offering solace to those seeking a path forward. Robert, now a shadow of the man he once was, retreated from public life. He spent his remaining years in quiet ministry work, offering spiritual guidance to people in prisons and rehabilitation centers. The fall from grace had stripped him of his ego, leaving him to reflect deeply on his actions. "I hurt the people who trusted me most," he often admitted, using his story as a cautionary tale. Though he would never fully escape the weight of his past, Robert sought redemption by dedicating his life to helping others avoid the same mistakes. Jack, serving his sentence for attempted murder, spent his days in contemplation. The anger that once consumed him gave way to regret and self-reflection. He grappled with the consequences of his actions, not just for himself but for his family and the community. Letters from his children, though infrequent, became his lifeline. Jack longed for the chance to repair the damage he had done to them, even if it meant waiting years for their forgiveness. For Rachel, redemption was a much harder path. As a single mother, she worked tirelessly to rebuild her relationship with her children, focusing on honesty and rebuilding trust. The road was long and fraught with challenges, but with time, Rachel and her children found moments of healing and connection. The legacy of Living Grace Pentecostal Church was forever changed, but within its walls, a new chapter began, one built on truth, accountability, and the hope for redemption. Years later, Living Grace Pentecostal Church, now renamed Hope Haven Fellowship, stands as a beacon of resilience. Under new leadership, it has transformed into a sanctuary for truth and redemption. The stained glass windows, once witnesses to chaos, now cast warm hues over a smaller but more devoted congregation seeking solace in honesty and healing. Rachel, though forever marked by her choices, has worked tirelessly to rebuild her relationship with her children. Through patience and vulnerability, she has begun to earn back their trust, finding purpose in their love and forgiveness. Though the journey is far from over, Rachel embraces each day as an opportunity for renewal. Jack, having served his time, lives a quiet life in a neighboring town. Letters from his children, once sparse, have grown in frequency, offering him a glimmer of hope. Reflecting on his choices, he carries the weight of his actions but strives to rebuild bridges with his family. Robert, a shadow of his former self, spends his remaining years counseling others in small, overlooked communities. Humbled and repentant, he uses his past as a cautionary tale, seeking redemption through service. Though broken lives remain, this story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, healing is possible when met with truth, time, and forgiveness. This story reminds us that even in the wake of betrayal and violence, healing is possible with time, truth, and forgiveness. If you enjoyed this story, Like, share, and subscribe for more compelling content.